Hey, I'm Truman with Park Tool, and this week we're going to be talking about rear air can service. Rear air can service should be done once, maybe twice a year, depending on how much you ride, to prolong the service life of your rear shock. So what it is basically we're going to be removing the air can and replacing all the seals and wipers that we have access to at that point. And then upon reassembly, we're going to be putting a little bit of fresh grease, a little bit of fresh oil in there, just to prolong it. Every second to third year, you should be sending these into Fox, and they should be servicing the damper. Not too many shops are equipped with a nitrogen cylinder, so they can't do the damper service, but some authorized retailers are. So the first thing we're gonna need to do is remove the shock from the bike itself. So this one's a 4 on one side, 5 on the opposite. So about there, pull this side off, put that on my overhaul mat. I'm gonna lift up on the rear suspension here, leave a little bit of pressure so I can pull out that rear set of linkage there. All right, now I've got a 6mm here. I'm gonna unthread this. Be careful, your shock is now totally free to be removed. I'm gonna pull that out and drop the shock. So to start the service, we'll start with kind of cleaning this whole thing up. There's quite a bit of dust on it, little debris here and there. And we wanna make it clean so that once we start doing the service, none of that dirt gets inside the shock itself. We don't want it inside the air can, we don't want it getting inside the damper, nowhere. So we'll clean it, then we'll pull this hardware off the bottom eyelet here, and we'll get started. All right, so like I said before, this is a fairly simple, fairly inexpensive process. I'll kind of go through some of the tools that we're gonna use here today. One of the first ones we're gonna use is a shock pump. Any shock pump will do. So we're gonna use this one. 99% isopropyl alcohol. It's another important one. Lower grade will do, but it could discolor some of the black anodizing. So I'd recommend the 99%. You're gonna want a rag, a little bit of grease that is compatible with your shock. We have a pick. This is the up 3. One of my favorites, got a little hook on the end. A air can service kit. This punch I have as a cylinder, just in case it's hard to turn this with, it'll be stuck in here to hold that eyelet. Let's get started. What I'm gonna do first is actually clean it up. So, using our 99% Isopropyl, give it a nice wipe down, make sure no debris can get inside of this after we have it apart. Put that over there. We're gonna put this into descend mode, and we're gonna put this all the way to fast, in fast rebound. So turn the rebound all the way to the quickest setting. Now, we're gonna let the air out of our shock. First, I'm gonna pull this air cap off. It's important to note that these caps are more significant than your, one off of your car tire or something like that. They actually have a lot better sealing capability because the pressure in here, under compression, you can see pressures up to 400 PSI or better. This particular shock was at about 160 PSI. That's something that you should note when you're removing the air pressure from your shock. This is the air pressure that you started with. Maybe that's something we can add back into the beginning. Yeah. All right, so this is a more important step for shocks with a larger negative air spring, but we want to let the air out slowly instead of fast. We don't want to just remove the valve core. We want to put the pump on and remove that air pressure slowly. And that'll let it out of both chambers a little bit better. All right, and I'll just pull that right back off. Now, this air can is gonna come right off the bottom of this damper body. That's what we call this stanchion at the bottom, damper body, this bottom eyelet. It's obviously not gonna make it past this hardware. Not all of you are gonna have this hardware on yours, but some of you may. So in order to do this, we're gonna have to remove this bottom hardware. Should just be kind of easy to push that out. Kind of push it both ways, get a little bit more. Ooh. So this one's posing to be a little bit difficult. So what I'm gonna do, there we go. Inspect your O-rings. Those seem to be in good condition. Bushings are in good condition. We can also take off our sag O-ring. So now we are left with our damper body, shock body air can. And again, we have it set to the descend mode or full open and all the way to our quickest setting. So now you can grab the top of the body, grab your air can, and typically you can just spin them apart. So this one is coming apart. If you were having a hard time at this point, you can put a piece in there and use it as a lever. You're gonna wanna try not to use a strap wrench, but if you have to, just be careful. This one we don't need it, so we're gonna unthread this. So you'll notice I'm unthreading, it's not going anywhere. So it's all the way unthreaded, but we need to pull this off now. So what I like to do is kind of grab it like that and push that through until you break it free. So now we can pull these apart. And notice this shock has a fairly large volume adjustment spacer in here. So that's important because there's a seal, there's an O-ring up inside there, so we're gonna actually have to remove this. And that's probably one of the first things we're gonna do. So let's go ahead and get started on that. All right, so we're gonna move this O-ring. Be careful with your pick. You don't want the sharp edge to touch this damper tube. So I'm gonna use the back end, just kind of lift it up, and then I'll use my fingers. Same with this. That one's not wanting to come up for us. I'm not really looking to force it either. So let's get that air volume spacer. Let's lift up on that. So now, lift that up. I'm gonna hold that little shim up like that so we can slide our spacer out. Now let's start with the O-ring that we just gained access to. All right, now we're gonna pull this O-ring out. Now we can grab it with our hands. Gonna pull that out. All right. So now we can open our bag of tricks here. I'm just gonna dump those over here. So you'll notice there's quite a few larger O-rings. Only one of these is gonna be the one we want. And it looks like the largest one of them all. It's gonna be the ticket. It's gonna be the one we wanna use. So I've got residual oil from pulling this apart on my hands. That's enough oil to lubricate this seal. So we're just gonna get a little bit of that oil that's residual on my hands onto this O-ring. Just like that. Now, I'm gonna pop this back on, over, down, find that gland that it sits in. So now I kind of got that started with the help from the pick. Now what we can do, I'm just gonna work my way around. Work that O-ring carefully into that gland. All right, I don't know if you guys can see that well, but it's nicely in this gland down here. It's all the way around. Little bit of lubrication in there. So now we're gonna put this air volume adjuster back in now that we have our O-ring nicely seated in its gland. So this definitely should have been paying attention to its orientation upon removal. This step is facing upwards. You'll see it meshes perfectly. Once you go through your stroke, it'll mesh perfectly with that damper body. So we're gonna take this, point this gap directly towards our compression and rebound adjustment knobs. We're gonna push down on it, until it kind of snaps into place. And I like to get the shim here pushed all the way into place as well. And the O-ring that sits right there as well. Those will move on their own, but makes me feel better putting them right down there where they belong. Next is this quad seal and these two wipers. So I'm gonna push up. This is another thing to make note of. Anytime you don't have to use a seal or pick, a seal pick, the better. Because every time you use one, you risk etching or scratching the anodization or the actual material of the shock, and then it could develop some migration of air or fluid in the system. So what we're gonna wanna do, start on one side, start on one side, push to the other, and we'll just take that off, and actually take the other one off. And now finally our quad seal. Quad seal is going to be a little bit tighter because it's not a split ring. So I'm going to work that off and remove that just like so. Okay, now I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning in there. Make sure we are all free of debris or old oil. So just like we did down here, we're gonna reinstall this quad ring and these two split rings. A little bit different on this one though. We are actually going to grease this up a little bit. The grease we're gonna be using on this is specific for shocks. So definitely when you're looking for a grease to use here, get some that you know is compatible with your shocks. Here, just a very light layer, doesn't have to get on too thick. Just want to get in all the crevices. Work it in there. Now we're ready to put that back into that gland. There. These ones we don't have to grease. We'll slide those on. So, damper body is all good to go. So now, we have our can here. And this one we have a little wiper on the outside. That one should be fairly easy to take off with your hand. Just like that. Set that over there with the old stuff. Now, these ones are the kicker. All right, we've got wiper, quad seal, another wiper. I'm gonna put my pick in, just in between these seals, being careful not to get to the end. You don't wanna scratch the gland. I actually punctured that seal. I didn't puncture it far enough on that one. So now I'm gonna rotate. See that? I got a little bit more meat. Now I'm gonna push it out. Kicks out the bottom. These two are also a little bit difficult. So you're gonna wanna stack them up, puncture that top one, move it out just like the other one, push it out the bottom. Now the most difficult one of all three is this one. You wanna puncture it, but not all the way through. Lift and push. There you go. So now you've got all three of those out. I'm gonna clean up that gland, clean up this whole can. Use a little corner to get into those glands. All right, and now we're ready to reinstall our fresh seals and wipers. So we got these two little guys and this guy. These are a little bit difficult to get in, but if you hold them like an inverted taco, just how you don't want to hold your taco because you'll lose all your you know, everything that's inside the taco. You just want to hold them like that, push it in, push it down, make sure the sides start going in, push, and oh, we went a little bit too far. There we go, popped right in. Okay, so we're gonna want to grease up this quad ring just like we did the last one. Just a little bit of grease. Get on top of that wiper there. All right, and that's in. Now it's important to note that these are very durable. You don't want to puncture them, but you can fold them and they will be just fine. So with this one, you want to get right on top of that quad ring and start working it in all the way around. You can kind of see it starting to kink here. Not the end of the world, don't be worried. Same thing on the other side, but here we're getting right to the end. I'm just going to push straight down on this last little bit. And we're back in business. All right, you can see they're sitting in there nicely. All right, now we're gonna put on our wiper. We don't need to grease up our wiper, and I actually wanna clean this all out. So what can happen is if you have oil and grease out here in this wiper gland, when the shock gets warmed up, that grease will kind of liquefy. And when you liquefy that grease, it might leak out the top. And so it might give you the thought that your shock is actually leaking when it's not. It's just a little bit of weepage from a little bit of grease. So just pop that in and you're good to go. So we've got new seals, new wipers on both sides of this shock. So basically we're ready to go back. And you'll notice we have 4 extra O-rings. This one we'll end up using. This is gonna be our sag O-ring. So, but you'll notice we have 4 extras, and that's pretty typical with an air can service. Also of note is if you have a DRC V-valve shock, the large O-ring is not included in this kit for that. You'll have to order that separate. So we got our wipers and seals on. Now, we have this little pillow of float fluid. So we gotta put some on our shock here. And of course you wanna use the whole thing, but don't. You just need a little bit. So we're gonna cut that off. I can get rid of these, it can be distracting. So these will come out in drops. So really you just need 1 decent little drop up there. Oh, there's 2, that's not the end of the world. And then 2 on the damper shaft there. And that's all you need. Anything more and you can start clogging valve ports. It can actually cause more harm than good if you put too much on. So now we'll put these together. Can take a little bit. Everything's fine there. So these, you'll notice this doesn't want to stay up. So what you can do is push up with your hands. Some will be quite a bit harder than this. And it definitely helps to have it in the open position. And then you can also use the ground or something as a little helper to push down on. All right, and this, just go hand tight and then you're good to go. So now we're gonna put our sag meter back on. Put the fresh one on there. Sag meters, these little O-rings live a tough life, so they typically will dry, rot, and crack. So it is recommended to replace them. If there's one place to run multiple seals or O-rings, this would be it. Just in case one fails, you've got an extra one. So we'll put that back on. We're gonna actually put our hardware back on. O-ring back in there. Put that back. Perfect. All right. And then we're gonna reinflate the shock. So we're gonna reinflate it to what it was at. This particular shock was at about 160 PSI. Let's go here. And there's 160. I'm gonna pull this off. And we're ready to reinstall this back onto the bike. Another thing is to get your rebound back to where it was. I was 4 clicks. This person likes a fast bike, so a fast rebound. So that's something you might want to, if you're talking with a customer, you might want to talk to them and be like, hey, you like quick rebound? Because that's what it was set at. All right, so I'm gonna get this reinstalled onto the bike. I put a little bit of grease on the threads of this. Double check with your frame manufacturer to see exactly what your frame requires. So we're just gonna put this back on. All right, so we'll put a little thread locker on this one because that's what the frame manufacturer wants. All right, and then you're ready to torque your suspension to spec. So double check with your frame manufacturer and see exactly what that torque spec is, but it is important to do that. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned something. If you have any additional knowledge or anything, pop it down into the comments section. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you later.